start, Rico? Okay, cool. So I've got a few housekeeping-y things before we start, because what you're about to hear is based on our current understanding of the GDPR regulations. And if you've actually had a chance to look at the regulations, understanding is all about it. It's very hard because a lot of it's written in double negative. It's quite interesting. They ask us to be clear and unambiguous, but the way they phrase stuff is also not very clear and unambiguous. It's also together with guidance that's been issued by appropriate bodies, and that's all the way up to the 4th of March. That was the last set of guidance that was issued. So we're really hot off the press with some stuff here, and actually on the day that guidance came out, Paul and I were using that guidance to answer a query for one of our clients. Our own research, which you will see on a table outside that we did with Data IQ, which is now 9 months old, but actually the consumer part of it is still very relevant, and I suspect some of the B2B parts of it are also still relevant because everybody's been pausing a little bit, trying to work out what's going on before going full steam ahead. And just generally keeping abreast of general developments that are out there and what we're seeing in the press. Because what we've got to be very careful about is not all guidance has been issued on all topics. So what we're going to tell you today is our current understanding. Things may change. What's more is there will be different interpretations of how that guidance should be read and differences between the guidances. And in fact, Chris and I have regular debates over what something means. And if we're having regular debates about that, then it's going to be very difficult for businesses to work out how you're going to actually apply this. So I'm putting that caveat up front. It's very important. Also, the other caveat is that DST, and otherwise I'll get into serious trouble with that man over there, DST do not offer any legal advice and guidance. This is all consultative around GDPR and how to be compliant. It's not, you'll hear nothing from the legal side of things today. Where's my clicky dot? Oh, I've got to put it over here, haven't I? Right, so before we start, I want you to be really, really honest. Before coming here today, how prepared were you for the GDPR regulations honestly? Number 1 is completely prepared. Number 2, nearly there. 3, we've started or not started yet. If you'd like to click now. Can't hear that clicking. And see the answers. Okay, so 64% saying that you started. That's very good, actually. And if you looked back here in this research, it was a lot less. There were a lot of people who were not very prepared at all. It was very concerning. But as you can see, completely prepared, 0. That is very honest of you. That is pretty much the case, because you can't be, because not all the guidance is actually out there. So what is actually available at the moment? So there's the Working Party 29 who've issued guidance on data protection officers, and we have our own data protection officer at the end, Chris. You can't have him. He is ours, right? This is very important. You're going to have to find your own, potentially. Chris will tell you a bit more about that. Guidelines on the rights to data portability. Chris will explain what that means. And guidelines for identifying the controller and the processors. The Information Commissioner's Office, on the other hand, has been doing a 12-step guide to GDPR. And actually, that is a very, thank you, stealing my stuff. This is my show and tell stuff, please. Thank you, Stephen. Right, okay. The 12-step guide is, to a certain extent, the backbone of this presentation. Whilst it's, at the moment, quite a high overview, we've delved down a little bit into it, and we've also looked at the other guidance. So there's privacy notices, code of practice, and on the 4th of March, the consent draft guidance, which is a very, very important area, and we'll spend some time on that. But there's stuff to follow. Contracts and liability, profiling, risk, and then over here, there's a huge amount of stuff to follow. And not all of this guidance is going to quite fit with what you think the legislation is. In fact, we had a discussion this morning of one where the guidance is almost the complete reverse of what we thought the regulation actually said. So in terms of the context, marketers, people in this room, want to be relevant, timely, and motivating with our messages. And data is the fuel that drives that. So we understand that, we understand how important data is, otherwise we wouldn't be here. Consumers too do not want rubbish, irrelevant messages. Yeah, that gets them upset. Not all consumers, however, understand that it's the data that they give us that drives better messaging for them. And so a lot of them are quite suspicious about giving out data in case it's misused or abused. And some companies do that. Others will quite happily part with their data as long as there's some kind of value exchange out of the back end of that. Whoops. But the government, they're not really concerned that much about marketers. They are concerned about consumers. They're concerned that people's rights to privacy are respected and that businesses adhere to these regulations. And that's what's driving them. So whilst you might look at the regulations and say, that seems a bit unreasonable, it's because they're not looking at it from your point of view, they're looking at it from here. And to a certain extent, that's one of the cultural changes that you've got to have. We've all got to start looking at it from here. So GDPR has a deadline, 25th of May 2018. And I was asked just before I came into this room, thank you for the question, Graham, what about Brexit? Surely we're leaving the EU, this doesn't matter to us. It has no impact whatsoever. Brexit does not matter. This will become part of UK law, it will be enshrined in law. That's not a get-out clause. It will happen. And because of that deadline, this is something that actually means you have to start working on this now, because the culture and the infrastructure changes it's going to involve in terms of people, systems and processes are quite considerable. The scary bit is the fines. The fines can be up to 20 million euros or 4% of an organisation's annual worldwide turnover. Now the ICO to date has been relatively lax in terms of fines, although got a little bit excited lately. Under GDPR, their funding model changes. They're going to be there's a little bit more tooth to the ICO. They are going to go after you if they think you're not doing the right thing. Just to make things slightly confusing, there is also a review of the e-privacy directive, that's cookies, email, and that's also linked into GDPR because they're trying to align them. And there's some fairly unreasonable things going on about that are confusing everybody at the moment as well. And it's a huge issue with lots of noise. I mentioned the ICO lately, data abuse probe to trigger fines for 11 charities because they were doing some profiling activity that was not appropriate. Which, the consumer champion, they think about the consumers, but even then they've had problems. And this is an interesting stat. 52% of global IT decision makers think they will be fined due to GDPR because they don't think they're going to be ready. Hopefully we'll prove them wrong on that one. And as we said in our research, consumers are cautious. 50% of them prefer not to share data. They've told us, we don't want to do this, we don't want to prefer it, we don't want to share that data. And the only reason they will share is if they trust your brand and you are open with them about what you're using that data for. And in fact, that's kind of enshrined in the regulations. That trust and openness is what you've got to do in order to convince the consumer, but also to meet GDPR. Third-party consent is next to impossible to get. People are just not going to sign up to it. That's going to have a major impact on the cold list industry. And some of the suppliers out there have already taken data off the market to get it re-permissioned because it's not compliant with GDPR. You know, full marks to them for being brave, and full marks to them for actually making a statement that they've got to do something about this. In terms of consent, the shelf life is shortening. What we found in our research kind of echoes what the DMA was telling us. About 50% of consumers want to update less than every 6 months. And there was a small group, a relatively small group, but still significant, who want to be informed of their right to say, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to change my consent every time you contact them. So to get that consent, there needs to be a value exchange. And if for some reason, God forbid, there's a breach, trust flies out the window. Your organization will lose a lot of trust. And as we found in the research, a lot of businesses are not ready. At the time we did it, 50% of brands said they were somewhat aware. That was not so good. But less than 70% actually had prepared anything. Businesses aren't as prepared as they think they are, because to a certain extent it's about how do you get this thing up the agenda in the business. Is it high enough up? But actually, this is a serious marketing impact piece. The permission to market is key. It needs to be understood and tracked across the business-wide. So how can an organization gain or retain that trust and remain fully compliant? But also you still want to maximize the use of your data assets. You don't want to go back to the old days when no one did anything clever with their data to improve the marketing communications that people got. So what do you need to do? You need to be fully aware. Where am I compared to the GDPR requirements? So you need to understand those GDPR requirements in plain English and do some kind of gap analysis. What are the serious risks for my business? Graham, this morning we were talking about one of your key risks. What's the strategy I need to get there to fill those gaps? Are there some specific issues in my sector? So for the charity sector, they've also got the fundraising preference service going on and know your customer in the finance industry because of the FCA. Do I need some external help from people like us? There's the ad. And this is crucial. Make it a strategic focus for senior management now. Don't put it off. You need to put some time and resource in. And actually, in one of the articles in the Act, it says you need to put some organisational and technical resource into this and review on a regular basis. So the ICO have done this checklist, which is great. And so a lot of this presentation is based around that. And you will see little numbers coming up at the bottom of the screen as we go through, so you can see where you are on the checklist for later on when we share the presentation. So areas around business culture, around lawful processing, so he's getting into legal stuff, the individual's rights, the right processes for the right data, accuracy is very important, what you do in terms of a breach, and that's now impacting on business continuity as well, and the big area of reviewing and managing consent. There's a lot to consider. This is a quote from the ICO. You should make sure that decision makers and key people in your organisation are aware the law is changing and they need to appreciate the impact that this is going to have. You need to build this into your day-to-day culture. It becomes a kind of mission. So it's not just compliance, although obviously it is because there's a big fine at the end of it, but it's being part of your culture to respect the individual and build that trust. So your staff need to understand, and they'll need to understand at different levels depending on the amount of contact they have with data. What GDPR is, what are the impacts, what processes need to be put in place, what happens when things go wrong, and how do I deal with suppliers? Because a big change in the regulations is whereas it used to be down to just the data controller in terms of responsibility, it is now the data processor who has an element of responsibility. But you need to be sure that the data processes you are using are fully compliant. And if you aren't doing that, then you're just as much in trouble. So it's a whole ecosystem that you actually have to think about. So one of our solutions is around GDPR training. So some people need a basic level of awareness, some people need a serious amount of detailed training or workshops because it's going to impact on their day-to-day life. And we will work together with you to assess your specific requirements. So that's one of the things that you may want to think about. I'm going to pass over now to Chris, who is our Data Protection Officer, who you can't have.
This is the bit where you all fall asleep because it's all the legalese bit. So, data protection officers. In the legislation, there has three questions you have to answer. And if any one of those ends up as being true, you'll need a data protection officer. So, is your processing carried out, or are you a public authority or body? Yes or no? I mean, that's a fairly easy question. Are your core activities involve regular systematic monitoring of subjects? If you're a Facebook, I'm sure that's a yes, but for a lot of us it's not. And do your core activities involve processing of special category data? This is the sort of criminal records or medical records or whatever. So that's what the Article 37 says in the Act. So looking at that, I'm sure a lot of people are going to go, oh, I don't need one then. Great. But unfortunately, or fortunately, one of the joys of getting guidance is it clarifies what it's saying. And the guidance now says the bit at the bottom. So if you process customer data in the regular course of your business, you need a data protection officer. Well, I don't see that in the top three. So the problem we've got with all of these clauses is that until you get guidance, you're not 100% sure what they really mean. Because personally, I would say that's a complete opposite of what the actual regulation says. This basically is saying almost everybody needs one, which is a bit odd. So that's where you've got to have that carefulness to be aware that just because when you read the regulation or when your lawyer reads the regulation, they think, oh, that's okay, we don't need to worry about it. When the guidance comes out, it might completely change the picture. Second thing I was going to talk about, very briefly, is international locations. At the moment, if you unfortunately have an issue with the ICO, you're in the UK, you'll deal with the UK ICO. Under GDPR, which ICO you have to deal with will depend on where your main administration centre is, or indeed, where the decisions about the processing are. So it may not be the UK ICO you have to deal with. Let's talk about lawful processing. For any processing at all, not marketing, but anything at all that you might want to do with someone's data, one of these 6 things must be true. Now, everyone spends all their time talking about consent because that's the best one, it's the top one. The second one's pretty obvious. You know, if you go into Amazon and you buy a book, you have to give them your address and your credit card and maybe a mobile phone, because if you don't, they can't send you the book or the item that you've purchased. The others are fairly obvious. Legal obligation. As a business, you might need to be asked, or your employer, you may need to ask what your ethnicity is, because the Race Relations Act says you've got to be an equal opportunity employer, so therefore we must ask that question because we need to, there is another legal obligation for us to do so. Vital details of the data subject. You've been hit by a truck, I need to give you medical attention, you're unconscious, I can do it anyway, because otherwise your life's in danger. That's easy. I don't suppose many of us here have to worry about a task carried out in the public interest. Necessary for the legitimate interest of the data controller. This is the catch-all. This is what most people will be using under data DPA and also under GDPR for, say, their direct mail. You don't need someone's consent to send them a piece of direct mail because as a business, you'll be using legitimate interest. It's in the interest of my business to send you this to try and sell you something. And under GDPR, that's the same, it's still there. The big change here, though, is you can't use that anymore if you're a public authority. So for most businesses, we're still okay, thankfully. It's not disappeared like we thought it might, unless you're a public authority. So the good thing here is those are the same 6 things we're used to under DPA, and unless you're a public authority, you've got the same 6 things now. So the other thing you have to be aware of, or should I say you have to make your customers aware of, is there individual rights? So on a website at the moment, or on a privacy terms you might have, you would explain, I'm collecting your data to fulfill your order, or I may do marketing with it further on, all these sort of opt-ins, etc. But now under GDPR, you have to specifically tell those individuals whose data you're collecting what their rights are. There are these 7. What do they all mean? So I'm going to go through them, hopefully in sort of English. What are you collecting? And why and who are you going to give it to? How can I see what you've got? Subject access is how it used to be, or still is. You've got something wrong, I need to fix it. I don't want you to do that with my data anymore, and it might be marketing, or it could be something else. I don't want to be with you anymore, let's say a bank or a utility company, but I want to give all of my information about, let's say, how much electricity you've used or gas over the last year or so to another provider so that they can give me a better rate. I want you to stop doing that completely. That's a fairly easy one, the one most people are used to. And the automated decision and profiling, what decisions are you making about me which might stop me getting something? What can I do about it? So you need to make your customers aware of all of those things when you're collecting their data. So let's look at the first of those, which is the right to be informed. I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but all of that information that's on that slide has to be on your fair processing notice. So suddenly your fair processing notice is going to become an essay. Some of them are long enough now. But the Act wants you to give all of that information in a clear manner. There's a lot of stuff up there. Now some of it you already give, but a lot of it you don't. What's the legal basis of the processing? Let's pick that one. So for each piece of data you're going to collect on, say, a website, you have to specify what's the legal basis that you're collecting it, which goes back to those 6 points I made a few seconds ago. Are you collecting it for the completion of a contract, or are you collecting it because, hey, I thought that's a good idea and I might do some marketing with it later on? Automated decision making and profiling. Now, before the regulation was finalised, there were various forms going through the various European courts, Parliament, sorry, and they were lots of rumours and lots of examples where profiling was likely to have need explicit consent, worrying all of us in marketing. But thankfully, now we have guidance, or at least initial guidance, from the ICO. This doesn't seem to be the case. The ICO is saying at the moment that you would only need that explicit consent if the automated decision-making will result in a legal or a significant effect on the customer. So for the most part, if we're doing profiling and automatic decision-making for direct mail, direct marketing type purposes, we'll still be fine, which is a big relief for all of us in marketing, as it says here. Ooh. So, you need to be aware of what you're doing with your data. As again, you've got a nice long list here. Where is it being held? What are you doing with it? Where did you get it from? Again, what's the legal basis for processing? Well, what you need to think about is, do I have the right people internally to sort this out? Do you know how to do a data protection impact assessment? What are your priorities for getting it all sorted? Because there is a lot you need to get sorted for GDPR. Record keeping. Now, this is one of the major changes, this accountability principle. It is now your responsibility as a business to keep records that show or highlight the decisions that you have made as part of GDPR. You have to evidence, as it says here, evidence and documentation are the key. So every time your business makes a decision that could affect your customers' data, i.e. what you're holding, how you're going to process it, what decisions you make about that data, how long you're going to retain it, whatever it happens to be, you need to make sure that's kept and documented as evidence, just in case, God forbid, the ICO wants to come calling and say, can you show me how you're dealing with GDPR? What decisions, why did you do that? And if you can produce a piece of paper going, well, there was a senior management meeting and we discussed this, and having considered both the business need and the consumer's need, this was the decision we made, and here are the signatures on the piece of paper, you've got your evidence. Now, you may find that the ICO won't like the decision you made, but at least they can see you've made a stab, you've considered it, you've considered all parts of the argument, and then as a business you've made a decision. And that's the decision you have implemented. They're not going to slap you with a whopping great big fine if you've done that, because you've got your evidence. You made a considered opinion. They might ask you to change that mind, but they're unlikely to get nasty about it because you've done as much work as you need to. The big thing here, data journeys. You're going to have to think about, where is your data? How does it come into the business? How does it go out? Who gets to see it? Who can change it? Where did you get it from? Data minimization. Do I really need to keep it? I collected it 2 years ago for some prize draw. Well, really? Does someone still expect you to have it now? Have you actually used it in that time? Because if you haven't, you really shouldn't be keeping it anymore. So let's look at the data journey, sorry. So here are the questions. How does the personal information get into your business? Where does it go? How does it go through? I've covered these questions already. But you need to think about that for every piece of data that goes through your business. You'll end up, I'm sure, with a nice pretty diagram. This is going to draw itself, I think. There we go. It's just a sample diagram showing a decision for someone to go through. But you need to make sure you've documented that. You need to make sure you can produce something that shows, it's going to be a pingy thing. How long do I keep the data? I'm keeping the data for 7 days, or I'm keeping the data for 30 days. Who gets access? What access do they have? And that's a pretty picture. I'm sure the actual diagram will look completely different. But the important thing is you have to consider that for every piece of data that goes through your business. Data protection impact assessments. I mentioned that earlier. This is now required where the information you're processing, if it was lost, is likely to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of a natural person. So that will depend entirely on what you hold. If you're a jeweller's and you're selling very expensive items, millions of pounds for that necklace or these earrings, then absolutely losing that data could affect the high risks to the rights and freedoms of a natural person. Someone could decide to rob the house or kidnap a child or whatever it happens to be. Similarly, if you're holding banking data, obviously, it goes without saying, that could affect them. But also things like utility bills. Because a utility bill is used to be one of the easiest ways of confirming you are who you say you are, however boring a utility bill might be in itself, you could say, well, if the utility bill goes missing, is that going to affect the high risks? Is that going to affect the risk of the rights and freedoms of that person? Possibly. So however boring a utility bill is, you may have to consider that and do a DPIA if you're processing those. What sort of questions does your DPIA have to have? Well, they're listed here. I'm afraid I've got a bit of the legalese again. Let's drag the articles out. Systematic description of the processing operation, including the purposes, and if you've used legitimate interest as the reason for your processing, state the fact that you've used legitimate interest. An assessment of the necessity and proportionality of the processing operation. Gosh, I love English. Isn't it horrible? Why are you doing it, and are you holding enough information is really the point there. Obviously, a bank has got to hold national insurance numbers, say, or copies of your passport or date of birth to prove you really are who you say you are if you ring up. But someone who's just selling you batteries for a watch, they don't need all that information. So is what you're holding appropriate for the task you're processing? Again, back to this, assessments of the risks. And then what have you done to manage those risks? What controls have you got in place? Because security is a very, very big part of GDPR, much more so than it was under the DPA. Business continuity. Now, the words business continuity are not actually in GDPR. But if you take those 3 statements there, or the top 2 for sure, and you showed them to a risk and compliance person, they're going to go, ooh, business continuity. Because in essence, that's what it's saying. So what GDPR is basically putting forwards is, not only do you have to have a business continuity solution in place, what they're making very clear down here is, you've got to have tested it too, and again, have that documentation to prove that you've done so. That's a big shift from data protection. Data protection was all about security, not continuity. Data breaches. You need to notify the ICO and possibly other bodies, FCAs, etc., within 72 hours of the breach, unless, or if it is likely, again, we've got back to this expression, to a high risk to the individuals. You've got to have procedures in place to detect, report, and investigate them. And it says here there's no set time frame for clients to inform public, other than using the word without due delay. But again, they've got caveats in there. So if the breach was encrypted, then it's not a breach. So you don't have to tell anyone, not even the ICO. If you've taken measures that means whatever happened, it's no longer considered a high risk, then in theory, you don't need to tell anyone. I'm not saying that's what you should do, obviously, but I'm just saying that's the way the law could be read. It also makes it clear that if informing the public is going to take a disproportionate effort, and that is informing your customers individually because they were affected by some breach, then you can, in fact, come up with a public announcement rather than having to talk to your individual customers themselves. So all of that breach stuff, again, you read it one way, but then when you look at the nitty-gritty inside it or the clarifications, and it's not quite as nasty as it originally sounded. But the thing about a breach is it's the reputation side. Just because the GDPR says you don't have to report it, either to the ICO or to the general public, if they're the ones affected, that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't. It's obviously a decision as a business you make because of the reputational side effects if it comes out later. I shall now hand over to Paul. You can talk through the rest. No problem.
Okay, so Chris and Mark have obviously talked about the need to do a gap analysis to understand where you are currently within your business, how your data flows, how it's kept secure, what data you hold. The need to understand that and put together both where you are currently and where your future state is key to then being able to identify what do you need to do to make sure that you're going to be compliant with GDPR. Data exploration is more than just looking at it from a compliance point of view, but it's also then taking it to the next step. How am I going to make sure that I am best practice with my CRM efforts if I'm not collecting the right data, making sure it's kept in a consistent format and utilising it in the right way. Data breaches, as Chris mentioned, it's the actual use of the need to talk to the public. There's lots of interpretation as to why you need to talk to the public, but actually it goes beyond that. As Chris mentioned at the end, it's more about your brand reputation. Being able to communicate to the people and admit, hands up, there was an issue, and then to follow it up and say, we're putting implementation controls in to make sure it doesn't happen again is key. A piece of research that was done last year was that if there's a data breach, pretty much the only thing you can do to try and gain back that trust is to put your hands up, say sorry, and be sincere. The second thing to do was to offer free credit searches through the likes of Experian and Call Credit. So in terms of breach notifications, we do have a solution in terms of how you can do that, but it falls into 3 key areas really. First of all, it's the admission part, getting a timely communication out to say to people, this has happened. Try and get that out there before the press report it. You think about things like TalkTalk and the big breach that happened there. Being able to tell their customers first would prevent some of the backlash that occurred. Being able to respond to inbound calls, having some call centre staff that are trained up, are aware of exactly what's happened and what they can tell to customers about, but then following that up afterwards to say, we were wrong, we've looked at it, we've understood what the challenges were, and this is how we're going to move forward and make sure that your data's secure ongoing. It all comes also back to the whole documentation part, being able to document what's happened and the mitigations you're putting in place. So we've got an opinion here in terms of data journeys. Chris had a nice visual in terms of how we propose to do data journeys. And really it's a question for you. Have you started to undertake that mapping of how data flows? So if you've got your clickers to vote. Okay. So it's good to see that a lot of businesses are making a start and are starting to build their data flows. Not everyone's done it as yet. Breach notification. In the event that you had the impact of a breach, do you have a process in place to be able to talk to your consumers and inform them of what's happened? So it's good to see that at least you've either got procedures in place or you have something already in place to execute and speak to your customers. On to consent. So consent, it's changing as a result of GDPR, and you will most likely need to review how you collect consent initially. It must be freely given. It must be specific in what consent you're capturing and informing consumers as to how you're going to use that consent. Gone are the days of pre-tick boxes. Obviously, with e-privacy, that was never an option for digital communications, but it needs to be explicit. It needs to be something that consumers take an affirmative action. You need to also be able to evidence what consent was given, how it was given, either through a website, over an email. You also need to be able to document exactly what consent was used. So if you change your consent statements over time, you bring in new brands, you need to be able to show that your specific customers opted into that specific brand. New identities, as they're coming on board, things like Facebook IDs and things like that are also becoming considered as personal data. And as Chris mentioned earlier, data processors have the need to be compliant as much as data processors in some ways. Consent is also no longer permanent. When you think of gone are the days when you filled out a data capture form and you ticked a box to opt into communications and you think, that's it, I've given my consent, you need to consider how frequently you need to refresh that consent. And if there is any doubt, refresh that consent. Give the customers the opportunity to refresh how they want to hear from you and that you are giving your consent. As Mark mentioned earlier, consumers want to refresh that on a 6-month basis. And the ICO have gone in to look at that into detail because obviously some companies, 6 months isn't really realistic. When you think of a car manufacturer, you wouldn't want to be asking consent every 6 months for customers to be able to talk to them. So the ICO have said that as a default, it would be a 2-year period. But if you can go through that stage where you've debated it internally, you've seen the point of view of both your business and your consumers, and you can document how you've come about your change. So perhaps for a car manufacturer, you might think actually 4 to 5 years is sufficient given a car purchase life cycle. As long as you can document that, the ICO will, at worst, they will come to you and say, you need to do that more frequently. In terms of consent management, you need to be able to manage your consent on an ongoing basis as easily as it is to give your consent initially. So you think about preference centres and permissions and how you can manage that ongoing. You need to make that as simple as process as possible as to when you're initially given your opt-in. You need to consider, is the way that you collect the data needed for a service, or are you coercing consent? You think about websites that are prize draws and that you have to complete your details and you have to opt in to receive communications to enter the prize draw. No longer will that be compliant. You also need to look at protection for children. How are you collecting the consent? And also, therefore, are you talking to the parents and guardians to gain that consent to talk to them? And are you monitoring your permissions? Are you looking at that from a business point of view, and how are you reporting on that within the business? Are you seeing that there's patterns and changes in opt-in permissions as emails, engagement dies off? Can you report on that and can you act upon that? If your current consent is no longer valid, there's two ways in which you can address that. The first being to look to regain consent before the GDPR deadline in May 2018 and look at repermissioning tactics. Whilst it's still quite new, there are evidence and there's examples of how that's been used around CAN spam. When that was recently changed, there's lots of businesses that did that for the American and Canadian businesses to utilise those tactics in your email communications, and consider the utilisation of legitimate interest where it needs to within the direct mail channel. Permission statements. Chris mentioned that there's a lot of information that you need to get across to your consumers, but the need to do that in a clear message is key. Trying to move away from the legal, long-worded privacy statements and permission statements, being able to be clear about how you're collecting the data. Perhaps consider multiple layers, so making it clear and concise from the initial data collection, but with clear signposting as to where they can view their rights as an individual. So we've got 3 opinion polls on this one here. So the first is around permission statements in terms of currently how do you draft your permission statements in terms of is that legal, doing that directly themselves, legal with the marketing team, marketing on their own, or if you're not sure. And I'll start the voting on that one. Need some flashy music, don't we, for the 10 seconds. Okay. So it's good to see that already legal and marketing teams are working together, and obviously that will need to happen more and more to make sure that we're clear in how we're talking to our customers. In terms of permission gathering, do you have a company-wide view of how people are opting in to consent on an ongoing basis? How can they change their consents? And I will start the voting on that one. Quite a mixed bag there. And then based on what you're hearing around consent and the changes for GDPR, how confident are you that what you're doing is going to be compliant? Not many people needing to go back to the office. Okay, so we mentioned repermissioning campaigns. Obviously, you can work with your email provider that you currently use. Some of the people here will be using our services that we provide, but look to deliver tactical opt-in programs. So as well as building it into your BAU engagement programs, look to send specific emails to gain opt-in before GDPR takes into effect. Look at things like win back and auto unsubscribes. If you're coming to a point where you're not going to gain their permission, you are hitting towards the GDPR deadline. and link back through to content and preferences. So enable people to be able to change their mind, being able to do that on an ongoing basis, as well as just unsubscribe to look at things like holidays. So no longer have an email for 3-4 weeks, 3 or 4 months, depending on what the business is doing. And now I'm handing over to Mark to talk about preferencing.
So a couple of other solutions that we have up our box of tricks. One is around permission research. As Chris mentioned, it's going to be a bit of an essay, but as Paul mentioned, if you can multi-layer it and sort of start off with the core important stuff and then allow people to dive into the detail, it might be better for people and you might gain more trust. So we work with a company called FastMap because research is something that you potentially want to look at in terms of what comes out of that legal and marketing department to say, is it clear? Is it trustworthy? Is it honest, flexible, appealing, etc.? And the wording of your permission statement can have an impact on the likelihood of people opting into your marketing activity, depending on how it does around these 14 attributes. So this is a benchmarking industry standard now that we've kind of subscribed into. And one of the other solutions is around a preference center. If you've got to get a view across your business and across all your brands and across all your channels, and it's got to be easy for that customer to opt in and opt out, as much it was easy for them to come in the first place, you need to have some kind of mechanism to monitor that and allow the customer in, and potentially it could double up as a subject access portal as well. So it manages their consent and channel preferences, informs them of their rights, avoiding the essay a bit, managing that complexity and additional variables that you're capturing about those people. So it's very transparent, and it also allows you to have, let's say, that subject access and potentially the data portability where you're passing on data to people as well. So it helps you get to a point where you're managing their preferences or potentially going off on a break rather than losing them forever. And we're very fortunate that Alistair from PHE has come to be with us today to explain both this from a PHE point of view, but also what you're doing for GDPR.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair.
Hi, everyone. My name's Alistair Devoisin. I'm Head of Data and CRM at Public Health England. And the guys just asked me to come in quickly and have a chat to you about what our data landscape currently looks like and what we're doing to get ourselves GDPR ready. Just for you, those of you who are not that familiar with Public Health England, it's an executive agency of the Department of Health, and our remit is predominantly around prevention and helping people make better lifestyle choices rather than the cure side of things that the NHS deals with. So from a marketing perspective, and I guess it's clear I need to point out that I am in the marketing department, so Public Health England holds a lot of cancer registry data. I don't deal with that side of things. It's purely our marketing comms. And our main objective from a marketing perspective, just to give some context, is about motivating and supporting millions more people to make sustained changes that improve their health. So we have 8 national brands covering a kind of a huge range of behaviors from cradle to grave. Hopefully you recognize some, if not all of these brands. And across all of them, there's a huge broad mix of data that we collect. So one end of the scale with One You, we have a health quiz where we're collecting quite rich information around people's behaviors relating to their smoking habits, their drinking habits, their eating habits, and their moving habits. In Rise Above, we actually have kind of child data there as well, so we need to be very careful with that, clearly. But down to something like Frank, we actually try not to collect any data there because, particularly with that brand, it's about trust. Anonymity around, if you're familiar with Frank, it's around kind of drugs and the drug helpline. So it's a huge broad range of data that we collect, and on our database we have 6 million customer records, and then that's being ever added to on a kind of more kind of digital cookie and device ID area as our digital ecosystem kind of broadens out. So that we're newer in that area, and we're still trying to learn and understand our obligations around that kind of data. And as you can imagine, being a public organization, we're under kind of scrutiny a lot of the time. So every time a new campaign goes out, there are lobbyists, and you never knew some of these lobbyists exist, like there are potato lobbyists, who'd have thought, that come at us at every angle to try and disrupt our campaigns. So I suspect when GDPR goes live in May, they'll be all over us. So it's really kind of key that we kind of get ahead of the game in terms of getting ourselves ready. So in terms of our current sort of landscape, so across those brands, we do have quite complex interconnectivity. So as a parent, you could be signed up to Change for Life, but as an individual signed up to One You. And then within One You, I could be a smoker and signed up to our 28-day Stoptober program. So there's quite a complex kind of interconnectivity there that we need to deal with. So it's important that we have a single view of our customers, one, to help us manage our campaigns effectively, and two, to ensure we're managing our customers' privacy. So we have, since 2008, been working with DST to create and now obviously manage a single customer view. And it was obviously important for us back then to ensure we can consolidate all our data in one place, so we're minimizing the amount of kind of suppliers that manage and have access to our data. So we have really, really strict controls in place with DST currently to ensure that only limited people, organizations can access any of that data. So even I, as kind of head of data, I cannot see a named individual on our database. I can only ever see aggregated data. But as I mentioned, our digital ecosystem is growing, so named data is only as a part of the picture. So we're looking more and more to leverage the other data opportunities that are out there around kind of mobile device ID and cookie. But again, we have strict policies around those. We're continually reappraising every new activity we do via kind of privacy impact assessments with our governance department. So, I mean, irrespective of GDPR, as you imagine from a type of organization we are, data security and respecting kind of customers' kind of privacy rights has always been very, very important to us. So GDPR really just puts this into sharp focus for us, and it's great because it helps provide us with a roadmap to see what more we can do for customers in terms of managing their access to data and their privacy. So in terms of sort of preparing ourselves, one of the sort of messages I'm having to convey to the senior team is that we need to prepare to be brave. We need to be brave about the fact that we're going to have to go out there and ask our customers whether they really want to engage with us. Do they want to be in our database? I mean, I said we've got 6 million people in our database. In the past, that was a big thing. That went in our marketing strategy. We used to say we've got 6 million people in our database because the focus was very much once upon a time about how many named individuals we had. But that's really just a number, and it's fairly meaningless if these people don't want to engage with us and don't want to be in our base. So it's about kind of shifting that mindset from it being all about us and what we hold to more about them, our consumers, and our duty of care to them. So the first big thing is around awareness building. So people in the organization are aware this is coming, but they don't really know the impacts of it yet. So a kind of few key things that we're doing in that area is about having an internal champion. So that is myself in this case, and because GDPR just won't just happen by itself, so it's really important to have someone that is constantly championing it. Again, as I suspect, all your businesses have their complexities and bureaucracy, but I've never seen anything quite like it in a government organisation, and our senior team have so many pressures coming at them that trying to get this topic high up their agenda is very difficult. So repetition is key, and I actually got another meeting this afternoon which I'm presenting to them for the third time around GDPR. Got to continue to kind of go back to them. Similarly, across the floor, we've got a marketing team of 90 people. DST have already come in a few months ago, and Chris did a similar presentation to them around GDPR, but it's about continually reinforcing that message, and we'll go back to them with some more detailed awareness training. So it's about getting this culturally embedded. But I am noticing already people are changing the way they're engaging with me in terms of every time a new piece of activity happens, asking me about what are the legal kind of ramifications of this. And then equally suppliers, because as was mentioned before, it's now becoming a joint effort. So it's less just about the data controller, it's about data controller and data processors. So we've got a number of suppliers that we work with from a data perspective, so DST kind of leading on that, and we have a data council that we established that sort of looks at all the challenges around data, around GDPR. So that's also very important. And then actually just to get things actioned and moving, we've commissioned DST to lead on this, and the three main areas they're going to focus on is about gaining full understanding of our data landscape. So all the points that the guys have been through, fully understanding that. Then recognizing the gaps between our current data capabilities and the future state we want to get to, and then devising those development strategies and what is a roadmap to get us to May 2018. So one thing we have already been working on, and we're very far down the line on this, and it's in the next few weeks this will go live, but we've already built a preference center. And for us, actually, even before GDPR became the big focus, was as more campaigns are going live, we've got more and more unsubscribe routes. So from a customer perspective, beyond that single unsubscribe event, it was very difficult for them to really understand what they were subscribed to and what they weren't subscribed to, what data did we hold about them, and could they change it. So whilst we were compliant in the sense that you could unsubscribe from a piece of communication, it was just that the clarity wasn't there. So we built new preference center that enables people to manage their contact details, but also at those different levels I was talking about. So whether I'm on Change for Life, One You, signed up to Stoptober, or another campaign, I can turn whichever one off I want to. And this has taken quite a long time to build. I mean, this has taken a number of months. I mean, predominantly because we have that complex kind of interplay between brands. But I guess I'd recommend this is something to start thinking about now. Because it does take a long time. So if you start thinking about the end of this year, you might not have enough time, because it's probably been about an 8-month process. But that might be just the intricacies of our brand, and as opposed to necessarily having to take 8 months. But I would recommend get going on it now. So hopefully it's putting us ahead of the game in terms of GDPR. And it's also been a good reset point for us, which I think generally GDPR is a good thing from that sense, in terms of looking at our historical opt-ins and making sure that we have complete confidence that we know exactly what campaign our customers are on, and equally that they do the same. So we're embracing GDPR in a very positive way. I think whilst potentially onerous, I don't think what's in the regulation is necessarily unreasonable. And I think as a consumer, we can appreciate that, because that's how we want data to be our own data handled. Obviously, as a government arm, and we have a duty to do the right thing, and particularly in our business, trust is very, very fragile. So we have to be very careful in that way. Clearly, we've got a duty not to waste public money. So in terms of making sure that we're communicating to those people who want to be communicated to. So as I said, a good reset point in that regard, and therefore we shouldn't be afraid of the potential impact on say, the size of our database. So then it means that we need to have confidence in those brands. So if we are going to lose data, we have to accept that we're probably going to lose some of that data. We go out there and ask them, because there are huge degrees of engagement on our base. But it's about having confidence in our brands and our skills as marketeers to find ways to motivate our customers, either to stay with us or to come back to us. But I guess the flip side is really on their terms rather than ours. So that's kind of where we're at on GDPR. We're not there yet, but I think on the clicker we're getting. If I've had a clicker, we're getting started, and I feel quite confident that getting started now, we've got enough time to get to a place come May 2018 that we'll feel comfortable that ICO can't come down too hard on us, or the potato lobbyists. Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. And as you can see, that's a prime example of the data controller and the data processor working together to create preference center, to look at the roadmaps, to understand and try and do the right thing. So, got your clickers at the ready. You came in here and you answered pretty much this same question. But after coming here today, how prepared do you now feel about GDPR? Was and am well prepared, much better prepared, still unsure of what is required. It's still all Greek to me. Well, I'm going to cheat. There's no answers, because we're going to tell you what you said later on when we send you the pack, because we feel embarrassed if you tell us how bad or well we did today. So it's a bit of a cheat. Sorry about that. But well done for participating. So I mentioned earlier the 12-step guide, and you will have seen through the presentation the little numbers coming up. These are all the areas you need to think about. These are the DST solutions, and as you can see, they cover everything on that list except these last two. You have to go out and recruit your own data processing officer, as long as it's not Chris. And you have to work out who you've actually got to talk to in terms of your supervisory body, because it might not be the UK ICO all the time. So there's lots of details outside around all the solutions, and also a little questionnaire to fill in if you want to have more information about any of the solutions. So how do we feel confident about standing up today and delivering this information to you? Well, we have certified compliance experts. We hopefully are subject matter experts, and we've shown you that today. We managed some 70 billion records in the last 12 months across the organisation. We have the right certifications in place, but more importantly, we only choose partners. And this is very important, because in the regulations it talks about your partners and your partners' partners, and you have to be aware of those, and they have to be compliant as well. And choose partners who are compliant. We deal with a huge amount of regulatory campaigns, so we're well versed in this kind of activity, and we work towards solutions that are tailored to your particular need in terms of the training, repermissioning, all of those very good things. So in summary, GDPR will impact upon your businesses. Now is the time to act. As Alistair said, you can't leave it to the back end of the year and hope it's all going to come together. There is a lot of stuff, but it is hard, again, as Alistair said, to get it up the agenda of people and to put time and resource and budget across on that. It is, though, more than just the cost of compliance. There is going to be a cost to this, and businesses are going to have to swallow some of that cost. But if you do it right, it is an opportunity to get better engagement with the people who are your customers. It is a reset, as Alistair mentioned. It's a good time to start thinking about this stuff in order to get it right and make sure you are prepared. DST can support you on the journey. We're not going to give you legal or regulatory advice. Happy, Tim? Yeah, good. But with expertise and practical solutions. And it is a bit of a changing dynamic out there. We are keeping ahead of the game just as much as our clients are keeping ahead of the game. And we all need to do that. And this is the starting point today. And hopefully you felt it was a very useful starting point. We'll get you more compliant towards GDPR working together. Thank you.